Thank you, Michael. And as Michael mentioned, this is Biogas Opportunities for Small and Medium Facilities. As he mentioned, this is a presentation of the PNCWA Residuals and Biosolids Committee. Just so you know that the committee is focused on all sorts of solids processing issues, basically inside the fence line or inside the treatment process. This webinar is what we think is going to be first of a series. As we were planning for this, we found out there was way too much to fit into one presentation. And so there will be subsequent webinars, and along those lines, we do welcome suggestions from the audience for what we might include in those subsequent webinars. And you can include that on your comments on the form that Michael referred to. There, my screen should be showing here. So why we're here, basically, this is a screenshot or a picture I pulled off the web. Everybody hates to see a flare. I know, in my case, my dentist's office is in Lake Oswego, and it has a great view outside that oversees the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant. And one of the prominent features there, especially in the early morning hours, is the gas flare. And I've chatted with people, and they want to know what that is, and I tell them, and they have the same reaction that most people do. Is they're surprised at the apparent waste. And I think everybody has that same sort of reaction, including us people in the industry. Just as an aside, this picture happens to have come from Grand Junction, Colorado, and they had this note on their website that I thought was pertinent to this discussion. They're implementing a CNG, or compressed natural gas, project in Grand Junction that they said is the first of its kind in the nation to capture excess digester gas and convert it to this form for government fleet usage. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but it is interesting that they're going with that technology. We'll be talking about that as we go. So here's the outline of the webinar for today. There's a general overview. It was prepared by Tom Chapman of Brown and Caldwell, but at the last minute, Tom got called away for some paying work, and so I'll be making a presentation on Tom's behalf. After that will be Aaron Jacobson, who'll be discussing, providing an overview of biogas technologies. And he will note that one of the big issues is biogas pretreatment, so we have a separate section on that that'll be presented by Jeremy Holland. And then last, we have a case study from a smaller wastewater facility in Pendleton, Oregon, that'll be presented by Preston Van Meter of Kennedy Jenks. So, just in general in the Northwest, they like what's going on in the biogas world. Their biogas projects are starting to receive more attention with high energy prices and issues with climate change, et cetera. That's starting to affect power companies who are showing more interest in expanding green power opportunities. However, in spite of that, as anybody who's gone through this knows, in general, projects in the Pacific Northwest are generally, it's hard to make them pencil out because our power costs are so darn low around here. But there are good and successful plants with cogen systems or biogas usage. I got some statistics of what's going on. It's kind of spotty. I found pretty good statistics for Oregon from the Energy Trust. And they say there's 212 wastewater plants in Oregon, and 50 of those are 1 MGD or greater, which seems to be sort of at least a starting point at which you might start looking at anaerobic digestion and then use of biogas. And of those 50, 28 have anaerobic digesters, and of those 28, 9 have cogen facilities installed with a total capacity of 5.8 megawatts. And there are planned expansions to take that up to 7.8 megawatts, having to do with fog addition and generation of additional gas. In an EPA report, they say there are 10 what they call CHP, or combined heat and power, or cogen facilities in Oregon, which surprisingly is the second highest number in the U.S. After California. According to Energy Trust, if all the digesters in Oregon had cogen, there would be a capacity of about 11.5 megawatts or 16 megawatts if they implemented fog receiving. And so according to that, we're about half built out on cogen systems. I didn't find as much for Idaho, only that there were 2 systems in operation with a total capacity of about half a megawatt. And then in Washington, 50 out of 330 plants have digesters, and EPA says there are 5 plants with 14 megawatts of capacity. I added the footnote for the source of that. That's a fairly recent report from EPA that has a lot of good background information. You'll be able to get this, you'll have PDFs for the presentation, so you can get this right off the web. It's a pretty good report for just general information on what's going on with biogas. So now just some general issues to think about in planning. Obviously, it's generated from anaerobic digestion, and typically, like it says, 12 to 18 cubic feet of gas, biogas per pound of volatile solids destroyed. The gas production lags the feeding pattern by a bit, which makes sense. It takes the bugs a little while to get through that stuff. Compared to other gases, it has a high moisture content, which is a factor that relates to pretreatment. And just a rough rule of thumb, and this is highly variable, but around 26 kW generator capacity per MGD, just in round numbers if you're wondering how big a generator might fit with your facility. Here's some typical numbers for biogas quality. It's about 60 to 65% methane, compared to nearly 100% methane for natural gas, and the rest is mostly carbon dioxide with a few other miscellaneous compounds thrown in there. It tends to have particulates and foam, and as I mentioned before, it's saturated with moisture. It tends to be corrosive, which is a big deal, and it has a heating value that's roughly about 60% of what natural gas heating value is. Typical gas usage. The biggie, of course, the one that I've mentioned a few times that's already in place in a lot of facilities is cogeneration. Cogeneration referring, of course, to the generation of power and heat. Heat is used beneficially in the facility. And these are various types of internal combustion engines, turbines, fuel cells, microturbines, etc. And Aaron will get into more detail on these in the next section. Another use in place, at least one that I know of, is the sale of scrubbed gas to a nearby industrial facility. And then, of course, I believe probably all of the generators in the Northwest at least use it to power boilers. There are a few things to keep in mind if you're planning for gas utilization system, and I'll mention it again, and we'll hear more about it later, is that pretreatment is critical. In order to make any of these facilities work right, you need to have good long-term successful operation of your pretreatment system, and make sure that you know what contaminants are there so you treat for the right ones. And you have to plan on long-term and continuous maintenance to make sure this thing works right in the long term. And because of its importance, it needs to be locked into your plant monitoring and SCADA systems. The big issue, of course, on the designer is going through a heat balance. And that's how you start on these. You want to know how much heat you're going to be generating throughout the year, and it is variable throughout the seasons usually. Make sure you know where it's going to go, and you want to make sure you have enough heat to do all the critical jobs, or have a backup in place to make sure you don't lose heat for your digester, for example. And then make sure you have a place to go with your excess heat. And if your big issue is coordinating with the local power company, if you're considering putting it back into the grid, synchronizing with the grid is a big deal. And of course, the other option is that most people actually use is just independent operation and use the power within the facility. And then you need to get with your local facility if you're going to be doing buyback negotiations or any things along those lines. Last, in terms of general considerations, is you need to be conservative. The experience has been that these things are sold by salesmen, and it usually turns out that efficiencies and runtimes are not up to expectations, and it seems that maintenance and operation costs are practically always higher than anticipated. Having said that, shouldn't be discouraged that there are successful biogas use systems in place, and with careful attention and dedication, yours can be successful as well. So that completes the introduction part. At this point, I want to turn it over to Aaron.
Okay, thanks. Just waiting for screen sharing here. There we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So some of this will be a little bit of a repeat, but anaerobic digester gas is mostly methane, which gives it its heating value, its usable value. The rest is CO2 and water, and then some impurities, which are the problematic part, hydrogen sulfide, siloxanes, ammonia, some other VOCs, but not much. In the world of biogas, digester gas is easier to deal with it than, say, landfill gas, which has an abundance of other VOCs. So this energy value in the methane can be recovered in a number of forms: heat, electricity, or some other a conversion of some other fuel for off-site sale. Those include low BTU gas, high BTU gas, or even a liquid fuel. So today's energy recovery options include what I'm going to call mature, second generation, and embryonic technologies. Obviously, the mature have been around for a while and are pretty proven. Second generation are getting towards mature, but may still have some of the hiccups of a developing technology. And embryonic technologies are new to the scene, so to speak. So the mature technologies include boilers, internal combustion engines, and biogas upgrading systems, although some of those are second and third generation. It also includes gas turbines and steam turbines, but those are not applicable to small and medium-sized plants. Second generation includes microturbines and fuel cells, and embryonic technologies are there's probably more than this out there, but sort of the relative ones to small and medium-sized plants would be Stirling engines and microturbines with thermal oxidizers. So starting with mature technologies, boilers, probably a pretty familiar technology to most of the folks on the call. Boilers are an efficient way of using gas in terms of recovering a lot of the heating value, 80 to 82% of the higher heating value of the gas is converted to hot water or steam, which is used to heat a plant, and the process heat loads, namely digestion. With digester gas, boilers can typically meet the peak process and space heating loads throughout the year for a plant. And I would say that's for most all plants. I don't think I've ever seen one that where there's not enough digester gas to heat the whole facility with boilers. Boilers are often used without gas treatment or pressurization, but that sort of that may be changing with the ultra-low NOx and low NOx boilers that are being employed more and more to meet air regulations. These are well-known technology and, again, able to meet heat demands. However, if you just are using boilers, your gas utilization is limited by seasonal demand. On cold days, obviously you're going to use more digester gas to produce more heat, and on warm days during the summer you may not be using any digester gas. Overall, typically about 1/3 to 2/3 of the gas is not used over the year. So that and although when the gas is being used for heat, it's used efficiently, you're not able to use all the gas typically. So cogeneration is, again, also called combined heat and power, which is a little more demonstrative of what cogeneration is, heat and electricity production. That can also provide the heating requirements for the plant. Typically, a cogeneration system can meet the average conditions for the year, so you couldn't meet all your peak heat demands using cogeneration. You'd have to supplement with boilers or some other heat source during peak heat demands. And about 40 to 60% of a plant's power needs could be met with cogeneration from the electricity production. Prior to combustion for cogeneration or conversion, biogas treatment is necessary, no matter what the end use, but in varying forms and complexity. So Jeremy will get into that a little bit more coming up. We'll start with internal combustion engines under cogeneration. So recently, probably within the past 10 years, we've seen the implementation of advanced lean combustion, internal combustion engines, which have very high electrical efficiencies, which correspond to greater electrical savings, and also high thermal efficiencies for saving on your heating bills. My graph down there shows sort of rich burn engines, which are still out there but not employed anymore because of the emissions that are associated with them and their low efficiency. And along the axis, you can see that the early lean burn engines get you a higher efficiency, lower emissions, and the advanced lean burn engines they really are pushing the envelope. They have really high efficiencies and very low emissions. They're just a much more technically advanced design. And you could probably find an engine to meet just about any size plant except for the very small plants, anywhere from 100 kilowatts, 100 kilowatt engine generator, which I'm showing here is installed in Massachusetts, up to 4,400 down at the Laguna treatment plant in California. So very small to very big ranges in size. The engines have a pretty large turn down, 50%, which makes them pretty flexible. They can operate over a wide range of available gas production. They do, however, have relatively high emissions, which can limit their application in, say, California and some parts of the Northwest where we have very strict emission requirements. Engine maintenance is typically pretty expensive, but that's offset partially by the moderate requirements for gas treatment and compression, moderate compared to the other cogeneration technologies. Microturbines, they come in smaller sizes than internal combustion engines, all the way down to 30 kilowatts and up to 250 kilowatts in size. And those obviously you can put these in series, multiple ones to get larger capacities. They have pretty small footprints and very low emissions, so they're great in a constrained site that needs to have low emissions, and there's not a lot of footprint and require quiet operations. Bit of history: the first generation microturbines, they experienced pretty short lives and low performance. Part of that was the need for them to have very clean gas. So some of the failures were due to the gas treatment requirements that weren't necessarily identified when they went in. And second generation microturbines out now, they're more robust in general in their overall construction. But they still have low electrical and thermal efficiencies in the 30% range or lower, which limits your power production and your heat recovery. They have limited turn down, so they're a little bit less flexible than engines, although putting small ones in series allows more flexible operation. As I said before, they require very clean fuel, especially siloxane removal. The silicon dioxide can end up depositing on the turbine, which is spinning at very high speeds and can cause imbalance. So that's one of the big deals in gas treatment, is get all the siloxanes out. They have fairly high costs for specialized maintenance, but most of them come with service packages available. Fuel cells are another second generation. They produce electricity and heat through an electrochemical reaction. They have very high efficiencies, high electrical efficiencies, and high thermal efficiencies, and they have very low emissions. These are employed quite a bit in California, where there are very strict emissions and where there are subsidies. There are two technologies available right now, the molten carbonate and the phosphoric acid. Phosphoric acid is more popular than the molten carbonate from what I've seen. There are several drawbacks to fuel cells outside of California or without subsidies in that they have very high capital costs and require extremely pure gas, especially any sulfur-containing compounds, hydrogen sulfide or mercaptans. They can poison the catalyst pretty quickly. The maintenance on the units is highly specialized and pretty much is required to be contracted. Another problem that's come up and is still a big problem is short stack lives. So the exhaust stacks don't survive very long, maybe a 3 to 5 year lifetime, so they have to be replaced periodically. And as of 2010, only one manufacturer of fuel cells that can operate on digester gas. So getting into the emerging and embryonic technologies. So the two technologies I'm going to talk about, what makes them interesting, I think, is that they don't require much, if any, gas treatment. This flex energy or flex power, I believe it is now, technology couples a microturbine with the thermal oxidizer. The thermal oxidizer is able to burn pretty close to raw gas. The pressure has to be boosted, but the slow burn through the thermal oxidizer inhibits the silicon dioxide formation, which is the big problem with maintenance on all the other technologies I've described so far. So it's a pretty interesting technology that's hopefully going to get some traction here. I think they currently have just one installation at this the size I'm showing here, which is 250 kilowatts. They also have very low emissions because it is thermal oxidizer and microturbine, which are low emissions to begin with. However, obviously it's an embryonic technology, which makes it pretty expensive. And the other drawback is that, well, one, low efficiencies, but also no turn down. So similar to microturbines without a thermal oxidizer. Next technology, emerging and embryonic technology, is Stirling engines. Now this may be a technology that is going to be embryonic for a long time. So the Stirling engine works similar to a boiler in terms of the combustion. There's a chamber for combustion. It heats up a fluid similar to heating up hot water, except that this fluid is used more as a refrigerant and is used to drive an engine, which then makes electricity. So it also doesn't have very much in terms of gas treatment costs, some compression, maybe some hydrogen sulfide removal, but in terms of getting out siloxanes, it's more like cleaning a boiler than it would be needing to remove the siloxanes for an engine which has a lot of rotating parts. They also have low emissions, very small capacities, but again, embryonic and very few applications of this technology around. So to give you an idea of cogeneration technology efficiencies and capacities, I've got a chart here which sort of on the lower scale it's a log scale, and on showing capacities in terms of electrical output, digester gas flow, and approximate size of wastewater treatment plant with anaerobic digestion. And on the vertical axis we have the electrical efficiency. So you can see that for small and medium-sized plants, gas turbines obviously aren't applicable, and fuel cells are sort of on the edge of a medium-sized plant. IC engines, microturbines, and the Australian engines all cover the small to medium size plant. Just a little bit about gas pretreatment. I won't go into much here, just other than to rate them for the technologies. The lowest treatment in terms of compression, siloxane removal, water removal, and hydrogen sulfide removal would be boilers, followed by internal combustion engines, gas turbines, microturbines, and fuel cells. The two embryonic technologies I put in here have the thermal oxidizer with microturbine and Stirling engine. Sorry, they fit in between boilers and IC engines because they require at least some compression. So another alternative to cogeneration is biogas upgrading to biomethane. And what that means is essentially separating out the carbon dioxide as well as all the components that would be removed for gas treatment for cogeneration. And typically you're going to be removing the hydrogen sulfide and siloxanes and water to a lower level for biomethane production. What that means is you have a gas out the back end of the upgrading system that's 97% methane or higher. A lot of people are interested in this lately, and there are a growing number of applications to go along with that interest. Right now, there are at least 4 wastewater treatment plants employing biogas upgrading from 100,000 cubic feet per day up to 2.4 million cubic feet per day, and all over the country, King County, San Antonio, and Newark and Hales Avenue in California. While there's just 4 plants here, there are a large number of landfill gas upgrading plants in the U.S. This typically does better at a larger scale, the biogas upgrading systems. And then around Europe, there's at least another 75 between Sweden and Germany and some other Scandinavian countries. There are 3 major categories for CO2 separation, and that's physical and chemical solvents, which include water, amines, and glycols, pressure swing adsorption, and membrane separation. And the systems are typically more complex than a cogeneration system in terms of the process, but they come packaged. There are multiple system packagers that provide maintenance service plans sort of to deal with that complexity. So what that would look like: biogas upgrading to biomethane for pipeline injection. Going to kind of go quickly here, but we have digestion, gas treatment, the digester gas separation, going to pipeline or to boilers to provide heat at the facility. This may be a favorable option in the Northwest where we have low electricity rates. There are already 2 existing plants in the Northwest that are upgrading biogas, with a 3rd on the way, and it doesn't typically have a large amount of combustion. There's typically a small amount of combustion on the waste gas, but you can meet stringent air emission requirements with the waste gas combustion using the thermal oxidizer or a waste gas burner. It's not typically employed frequently at small scale, but the units do go down to about 100,000 cubic feet per day, so they're available and being employed more frequently as time goes on. Compressed biomethane for vehicle fuel, it's pretty much the same process for upgrading to pipeline quality and injecting into the pipeline. And there are a large range of CNG fleet vehicles available, everything from refuse haulers to buses and trucks and cars. And rough rule of thumb, what the biogas that would be required to produce 100 kilowatt hours of electricity could displace about 6 to 8 gallons of diesel fuel or gasoline. And as mentioned, vehicle fuel quality is pretty similar to pipeline quality in terms of the required gas quality at the back end of the treatment process. CNG fueling stations, additional compression is required for CNG fuel up to about 3,600 psi in order to get the amount of energy onto the vehicles to give them large enough range. There are two types of stations, time fill and fast fill. Time fill is a slow fill that you would use for a fleet overnight, so 8 to 12 hours of refueling. Fast fill is similar to gas or diesel, where you're going to fill up pretty quickly, usually about 10-minute time frame is about what you can get for fill times on a CNG vehicle. There are at least 6 CNG fueling stations already around Puget Sound, some of them open 24 hours a day, so it's not a new technology to the area, or at least in terms of the vehicle fueling. So that's all I had. Jeremy Holland from HDR is next. He'll be presenting on the pre-treatment technologies for biogas end uses.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, hopefully my screen is visible to everyone now. So let's talk about how to get that gas clean in order to use all the fun and exciting equipment that's out there to make beneficial use of your gas. And so this is a general overview, and I'll do my best to try to make application to small and medium facilities. So let's just dive right in. If I can figure out how to advance the slide. There we go. So biogas treatment, what and why, treatment technologies, O&M costs, and quick wrap-up of design considerations. So I won't go into any details on some of this, but basically point out a few things. There's a big range in contaminant levels that you have to deal with, and that's true for both hydrogen sulfide and siloxane. Not really any variability with the amount of moisture necessarily, since everyone's gas is fully saturated, so that's going to be the same. But we'll talk a little bit more about the variability and what the impacts are. So as Aaron's already highlighted, pretty much you're going to be dealing with gas treatment if you're going to put in anything more than a boiler. There's definitely levels of effort needed and fuel quality needed, but in general, as you move up the chart, I think fortunately everything worked out here that Aaron's slide and my slide on biogas treatment levels necessary aligned, so that's beautiful. We planned it that way, I'm sure. Typical gas treatment train, super simple, is usually we're dealing with gas coming in from our digesters facility. We're taking H2S out, taking moisture out, and compressing, putting it into siloxane removal, and then off to its end use. And then, of course, there's additional treatment. And you know, mostly these days you're seeing people do package systems just because you have unit responsibility for the entire setup. And so I mentioned a couple that we've dealt with. ESC and Unison Solutions are out there. So let's talk a little bit about H2S removal. I'm only going to talk about a few. Iron sponge absorption. Absorption is probably the most common and simplest. There's also scrubbing, chemical filter, biological chemical, and then aerated biological filters as well. So really quick on the iron sponge, you got impregnated wood with iron oxide. It's been around for a long time, as indicated by this black and white picture. Pros and cons, it's simple. It handles high H2S concentrations. The cons, you got to change out that media, and it can be pretty difficult to deal with. The media itself, when it's exposed to atmosphere, because you're reducing that H2S, pulling out the sulfur, reducing it to elemental sulfur, it wants to oxidize, and so there it can be spontaneously combustible. So there's ways to handle that. You fill up the tank with water when you take it out of service. And there are companies out there that offer a variety of iron sponge media and systems. There's also proprietary media. This is sulfatreat, and it's pretty handy because the size of the media is consistent, and you create a pack bed. It's more stable to degradation, so when you're removing the media, it's easier to get it out. You don't have it basically iron sponge media. The wood will eventually turn into goo, and sometimes turns into hard concrete type stuff that's hard to get out. So the sulfatreat's nice for that. It's more expensive, so that is one downside, and it's also not readily, it's not available by anyone but sulfatreat, so that is a factor. Biological filters you got a pack tower, and you're using sulfur oxidizing bacteria, and then your elemental sulfur is going out in a liquid discharge. Fairly simple process, and can handle H2S concentrations that are high. You do have some water and nutrient consumption. You got to take it down for annual cleaning, and there's a couple different vendors there listed, and there's more out there as well. Let's jump over to moisture removal. So typically what we're doing is we're cooling down the gas to drop the moisture out, and doing that prior to compressing it, and then taking advantage a little bit of the reheat from the compressors, and then also a little bit more reheat to make sure that the relative humidity of the gas stays low. So a good sweet spot for cooling that gas down is around 40 degrees F. Like I said, we reheat using the heated compression. There's also some heat exchanger technology out there that are provided from some vendors that do a pass with the incoming gas and the cool gas and the hot gas, so you pick up a little extra heat recovery benefit there. So it's pretty standard stuff, and then you've got a blower to boost the pressure. The chiller package that you're using for cooling is not going to be classified, and all this equipment is classified. So those tend to be a separately mounted system that needs to be outside the classified envelope of the equipment. Siloxane removal absorption. So there's a couple different media out there that are used most commonly, carbon or silica based. They function pretty similarly in a packed bed. Really just absorption media. You have to make, the key with this is the moisture has to be taken out, which is why you see those downstream of moisture removal. Because it's a little bit more packed bed, also the pressure drop through the vessels tends to be a little bit higher than on the low pressure side of the system coming out of the digesters and through the iron sponge, so you need to be downstream of your compression stage. You can also, the advantage of the compression is those tanks can get smaller. You don't need as much volume to move the amount of gas through when you've got it at a higher pressure. So again, some common vendors that are providing the packaging out there. Come on, slides. A couple other ideas that are out there is some advanced refrigeration. Kind of mixed results on these. They're pretty complicated, but the idea is that you cool the gas down to a low temperature, Some of these facilities are actually going low enough to remove the CO2 as well. But the idea is to cool everything down enough to a point where you've got most of the contaminants are taken out when they condense. Typically, there is still polishing with a carbon filter at the end of this process because it doesn't get complete removal through the advanced refrigeration. So like I said, pros, one-step process, not terrible on the power usage side, and you don't have much in the way of media or chemical use, but it is pretty complex machinery. And I'm only really aware of one vendor out there, that Pioneer. Like I said, I'm not sold on these because they are pretty complex and difficult to maintain. So, and then you also have another option out there, pressure swing absorption, where you're boosting that pressure and then using regeneration of the media. You do end up losing some of that gas, about 10% BTU loss. That has to be flared, and so that is a little bit of a downside. But again, you get high quality. This is, as Aaron mentioned, one of the systems out there that is used to get to a vehicle or natural gas pipeline quality. So that's another consideration as well. So impacts to capital and O&M costs. This is what I was mentioning earlier when I had the slide up about what's in the gas. And so the contaminant levels, what's going to drive your O&M and capital costs? Obviously, the amount of gas you have overall is going to be the main element. But then beyond that, what the contaminant levels are in your gas, the treatment equipment that you are deciding to design around and use, the final in-use contaminant requirements of your piece of equipment. So obviously, boiler compared to vehicle fuel is going to have a big impact on how much treatment you need. And then lastly, the pressure requirements. You can get low pressure engines that only need a couple PSI maybe, up to some of the bigger engines, and some of the microturbines you need for reasonably high pressure for those to function. So that's another impact. And there can be a big range. Like I said, we see facilities. It's not unusual for one facility to have orders of magnitude difference in H2S levels and things of that nature. So it's just really depends on where you're at. So here's a quick idea of some rough costs for capital and O&M for the different processes. This was some work we put together a while back on some projects. And so just to give you a sense, this is 200 ppm H2S, which is probably on the lower end of the range. I think I showed 200 up to 3,000 is possible, and then about a 10 ppm as well in the siloxane. And so you can kind of see here some ideas about whether you're pressurizing, what the impacts are. It's like I said, the compression cycle, whether you're going to a 30 psi, and the impacts of the compression. One of the advantages, like I mentioned, was that with the siloxane removal, since it's downstream, you can get a smaller vessel, smaller system, which will reduce capital costs. So these are things to think about in terms of the what your plan is, because obviously the more you need in terms of treatment, you're going to get quite a bit more expensive. So again, here's some ranges for another facility that has higher H2S levels. This was for a project back east, and we were just looking at hydrogen sulfide removal specifically. So looking at a few different, two different options here, and so this is another thing to consider. Let's see, need to wrap up, and I guess I'm running a little bit over on time here, so I won't go into details on converting to pipeline quality gas, but obviously pricing, as you can imagine, pricing drops when you are putting in a larger system. And some few design considerations, like I suggested earlier, consider a competitive pre-selection, single source, so that you have a unit responsibility. Some redundancy of key equipment, multiple vessels in order to do take down a vessel for maintenance and not have to take down your entire system. Instrumentation is helpful that you can monitor your contaminants and recognize that the treatment systems have a reasonably long lead time as well. So that should do it for me, and I'll turn things over to Preston.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll go quickly through a project that we did with the City of Pendleton. I think we'll find, or you'll find that based on the discussions we've had to date or this far in the webinar, that this is on the small scale. Maybe along the small scale you could get for a gas utilization cogeneration system. So the City of Pendleton was working on final design. We were finishing up final design on a $10 million liquid stream upgrades at about the time 4 years ago when the economy was going into the tank, and this grand deal called the ARRA came out, and the city was able to obtain a $2 million grant and $2 million in zero-interest loans. And they knew that they were looking at some point in the future some pretty significant upgrades on their solid side, especially on their digesters. Some background on the plant: they used to have a whole bunch of potato processing facilities inside of Pendleton that discharged to the plant. It originally had a design flow of around 16 MGD. As soon as the city built these upgrades you see here, back in the 70s, the potato processors got the new rates and promptly moved out of town. So it's an unusual situation where they have way too much capacity. So when we're looking at the digesters, this lower digester is the primary digester. It essentially is the only one they need. The two secondary digesters are used for sludge storage, and then they use these drying beds. With the opportunity to get the stimulus funding and then looking at some of the incentives that were available, the city was basically able to add the solids improvements that I'm about to go through for the same rates that they were planning for the overall liquid stream project. So there was lots of incentive to move forward and to get out in front of the solids upgrades they needed to do in the future. So one of the things the city was interested in was looking at how they could take fog and food waste that is separated at the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institute in the city and use that on the solid side where they have plenty of digester capacity. There's also a local rendering facility that provided some opportunities for fog. And then there were some discussions with Pendleton Sanitary about how to utilize food waste that they were collecting from a local Walmart and other places. So their goal was to take advantage of what cogeneration offers and stop using the flare, recover the heat and reuse that for meeting all the plant hot water demands, and then to provide some additional revenue over time through bringing in tipping fees from these outside feedstocks. So we went through an evaluation. I won't spend a whole lot of time going through this, but what it boils down to is kind of a day one design gas production of about 45 SCFM, which is important in terms of the technologies we looked at, because you saw that for these smaller scale systems there's not a lot of options. The three we looked at were, we were originally designing around a Stirling engine. It's an external combustion engine. We're very familiar with it, both from the Corvallis treatment plant where we've been working for years, where they had a demonstration installation, and we went all the way through close to 90% design with the Stirling and Pendleton. Unfortunately, we weren't ever able to get an agreement, and I would call the technology something short of embryonic, using Aaron's terms. I would say it's non-existent. I don't know that it's really going to be in a market. It's on the second or third company, and I don't know that it's actually going to be viable. So we looked at a small IC engine for my power, but ultimately, when we got to final design, we settled on the capstone microturbines. The design is based on 2 microturbines. You can see they each have capacity for about 23 CFM, so we installed 2. And then I'll go quickly through just some pictures on what the facility looks like. It's just finished up and is kind of still in the startup phase on the solid side. They have been receiving some outside waste into the plant through this receiving building here. This is our connection to bring materials into a storage bay that sits kind of in an area underneath the on the side of the primary digester where they used to take septage. You see a little bit more of a close-up of the receiving station here. This is a rock trap, and this is then our pump that pumps everything from the connection point over into the holding tank where we have a recirculation system as well as a heat exchanger. Moving in, just following up on some of the things Jeremy talked about, you see here the carbon scrubber for H2S removal on the gas conditioning skid. This skid was provided by ESC, so Jeremy provided a couple of options, ESC and Unison. We've worked with both. In this case, ESC provided these. These are the siloxane removal vessels, the iron sponges. There's also a compressor dryer for pulling out moisture. And then you see the microturbines that sit off to the left, and there's 2 capstone microturbines. This picture shows the piping. It's fairly clean on the backside of the microturbines. And then the other improvements, kind of associated improvements, there is Kenny Jenks. We have our own preferred pump mix system for fog and food waste applications that we prefer to keep the scum blanket off the top of the digesters. And this shows the sludge heat exchanger, and then these are the hot water recirculation pumps. Be happy to answer any questions regarding the improvements, but that's a general overview of the Pendleton project and kind of the nexus for how we got there. So, Brian, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. So good job, everybody. Doing well on the schedule. We have a few minutes left for questions. The procedure is there's a box on your panel, I believe, where you can enter in questions. Right now we're not showing any, so I'll take the liberty of asking a few myself. On your presentation there, Preston, on the turbine, so these haven't been started up yet, is that right?
No, they have been. They're operating 1 turbine right now. They're not receiving a lot of outside feedstocks, so they haven't fired up the second turbine.
Okay, and so far are things going as expected?
Yes, as far as I know.
Okay. One of the things that Aaron mentioned is high maintenance concerns on the microturbines. Is there a maintenance agreement that came with those units?
Yes, there was a negotiated maintenance agreement with their capstone microturbines, so that's included in the contract.
Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, I was just wondering, how is the power used? It just plugged into the plant system, I assume? Yeah, the power's, there's no net metering off the microturbines. They do have a solar installation at the plant that's on a net meter. So the power generated by the turbines is used inside the plant, and they have plenty of demand to take that load. Okay, well, you mentioned the net metering. Did you discuss with the power utility the possibility of net metering?
We did. In the location that it was at in the plant, it didn't make a lot of sense.
Okay. I'm just curious. It seems to be a tough area in general. Just wondering what experience you had in dealing with the power utility. From what I understand, they're usually not too keen on entering into that sort of a deal.
Certainly, it's a fun process dealing with the power company when you're making energy instead of buying it. That's all.
Yeah, I guess that's not their business model, is it? So, okay, let's see. We had a question come up here. Let me see if I can. Okay, there's a question about Pendleton for you, Preston. It says, does the heat exchanger heat recycled sludge from the digester tank, or does it heat cold sludge before it's sent to the tank?
That's on the recirculation loop for the sludge in the tank.
Okay. All right. See, we got still a couple more minutes. I've got a couple more. Aaron, you're on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I was wondering on the biogas to biomethane process you talked about. Do you know what the gas company's view is on entering into that sort of a deal? If you're pumping it into the pipeline, are they happy to talk about it, or are they like power companies that it's more of a pain for them than anything else?
Well, depends on the company, but Puget Sound Energy, now they have a couple of plants that are currently doing that at Cedar Hills landfill, and then King County's Renton South plant both put gas into the natural gas pipeline. So it's not new to them. So I think you could talk to them about it, and they'd be more receptive than other places where it would be totally new.
Yeah,
I have
right.
I have talked to had a couple of projects where we talked to the natural gas provider, and they were looking for a project to do that with, so they were pretty interested in it, and forthcoming with what their contractual requirements would be for gas constituents.
Yeah.
So it depends on the company. It's probably the same for power utilities as well. So,
do you know what the basic deal is in terms of what they pay for the gas, or market rate, or do you know?
Depends. Depends on where the gas is going to in the end. You can potentially get them to wheel it like you would wheel electricity. So if you have an end user that wants to buy it at a higher price, then you could work out an agreement for them to wheel it. And it's probably a little bit too much, but if you in California, they're definitely paying a premium.
Mm-hmm.
But California's not really accepting outside gas at this point.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, but otherwise it's by utility basis on what they're going to pay for it, because some of them can use it to offset their energy portfolios, or their renewable energy portfolios, that is.
Okay. Great, thank you. I have another question from the audience, another one for you, Preston, and that is, what is the cost per kilowatt hour for the system in the case study?
That is a good question that I don't have at my fingertips. If you let me know who asked the question, I'll get them that information, Brian.
Okay, my display is poor. David something. It got cut off in my thing, but we'll be able to follow it up.
Okay, yeah, I can follow up with that information.
Okay. Okay. As far as I can tell, that are all the questions that we've received, and we are right up to our time limit. So I want to thank all the speakers. I think you guys all did a really good job, and I look forward to getting the members in the audience involved, participating in our upcoming webinars. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I really encourage people to provide suggestions for what you would like to see in subsequent webinars, either on biogas or on any other topics relating to our committee, the residuals and biosolids. So again, thanks to everybody, and hope to see you next time.
This is Michael Rainey at the PNCWA office, thanking everybody also. As you leave the webinar, you will be presented with a survey about the webinar, very, very short, brief survey, and that's where you can put in what other subjects you would like to see. And about CEUs, I misspoke earlier. I said that would be presented as a form automatically. I sent you an email with the link to fill out your request for CEUs. That's also very simple. If anybody has any questions, you can email me, Mike Rainey at pncwa.org. And thank you, Brian. Thank you, all presenters. And thank you, attendees.